Hello friends, today we are going to discuss another very interesting topic of law of torts, that is defenses against tortious liability. We will start with the introduction. Friends, if the plaintiff establishes the elements of a particular tort and brings an action against the defendant for that tort, the defendant will be liable for that particular tort. The term general defenses refers to a group of defenses or excuses that can be used to avoid tort liability, but only under certain conditions. Even in this scenario, the defendant may escape the responsibility by claiming a defense. In an action for defamation, the defenses of privilege, fair remark or justifications are possible. These specialized defenses are peculiar to some particular wrongs. There are several general defenses that might be used in opposition to the action. If someone is being sued for trespassing, slander, false imprisonment or any other wrong, they can use the broad defense of consent, for instance. Following are the general defenses. The first one is consent as a defense or voluntae non fit injuria. Second, plaintiff the perpetrator. Third, unavoidable mishap. Fourth, act of God. Next is private defense, followed by mistake, necessity and regulatory power. So now we will discuss defense of consent or voluntae non fit injuria. Accordingly, harm or even grave hurt may be inflicted on a person for which he has no recourse if he has agreed to incur the risk. This indicates that if the suffering is willing, no injury is done. This category includes wounds from the legitimate sports, games and surgical procedures. This concept has its roots in Aristotle's writing. Roman lawyers had also acknowledged it. The contemporary definition only refers to physical harm that people experience. In this situation, the risk that a person consents to is the risk of an operation not succeeding. In the event that he is hurt in a legal incident, however, there is no injury because he has consented to the legal risk that is inherent in such sports or events. Not just the physical risk, but also the legal risk, as discussed earlier, is acknowledged with the permission. It is possible to express or infer consent. If the plaintiff, say for example, willingly submits to harm, that fact can be used as a powerful defense against the claim. It is not possible to force someone to use a right that he has voluntarily given up or abandoned. You can't sue a house guest for trespassing on your property, and you can't sue a surgeon for violating your body by operating on you without first getting your permission. A person who allows defamatory information to be published about him also waives any right to sue for defamation. Let us understand this with the help of a case. The plaintiff in Hall versus Brooklands Auto Racing Company of 1932 was a bystander at a race held on the defendant's property, that is the Brooklands racecourse. The plaintiff was hurt when a car was flung into the crowd after being involved in a collision during the race. The court ruled that the defendant was not responsible because the risk of injury was inherent to the activity and should have been obvious to any onlooker. There are few exceptions to this rule, including the activity, sport or game cannot be one that is illegal under the law. Sports including football, cricket and hockey are permitted. However, it is against the law to fight with fireworks in your hands. Similar notorious risky procedures include movie shots. The maxim of voluntary non-fit injuria does not apply in certain situations. People who are taking part in the sports, spectators or other parties all have the potential to get hurt. Second, the consent must be free and be given voluntarily. It cannot be obtained fraudulently. And also, please keep in mind that knowledge does not always indicate consent. For the purpose of this defense to be admitted, in these cases, the assent of the plaintiff to the act of the defendant is mandatory. The plaintiff's assent cannot be used as a good defense if it was obtained fraudulently, forcibly, or under the assumption that it was something else. Additionally, the defendant's action must correspond with the purpose of the consent. The applicability of voluntary non-fit injuria is subject to the fulfillment of two conditions, as discussed earlier, the knowledge of the risk to the plaintiff, and second, the consent to take the damage knowing that it could happen. The maxim voluntary non-fit injuria states that there is no defense if only the first of these circumstances, that is, the knowledge of the risk, is present. Now, the plaintiff does not automatically agree to bear the harm just because he is aware of it. In the case of Smith versus Baker of 1891, the case involved a worker injured by a crane's recurring threat, resulting in a recurring injury. The plaintiff was aware of the risk, but the defendant's negligence caused the injury. The maxim voluntary non-fit injuria was ruled by the House of Lords not to apply because there was only knowledge of the risk, not its assumption, and the defendants were held accountable. Next, in the case of Dan versus Hamilton of 1939, P, a female passenger, knew that D, who was operating in a taxi, was intoxicated. Due to the driver's recklessness, there was an accident and P was hurt. D is held responsible. Now, we will discuss the cases involving the rescue efforts. Friends, this maxim does not hold true when someone sets out to save another person. Haynes versus Harwood of 1936 is the most prominent instance. In this case, a police officer P sprinted from his station to halt a van being pulled by horses in the middle of a busy street. When the several youngsters threw stone at the horse that the defendant D had left unattended on the highway, the horse ran. The police officer attempted to halt and rescue the horses but was gravely hurt in the process. D is responsible in these cases. Next is wrongdoer, the plaintiff, or plaintiff, the wrongdoer. In case of illegal or unethical conduct, the law provides a defense known as illegality. When properly employed, this defense prevents recovery for both immoral and illegal actions. Friends, the plaintiff's action may have contributed to the accident involving an overloaded truck and a bridge. If the bridge were to collapse, the plaintiff's case would be successful. However, if the defendant was at fault, their wrongdoing would be the deciding cause, making them liable. In the case of Bird versus Holbrook of 1828, as a trespasser on the defendant's property, the plaintiff had a right to compensation for any harm brought on by the defendant's unauthorized use of a spring gun in his garden. In the example as stated above, there are two possible outcomes. First, the plaintiff is the offender. Second, the defendant is the wrongdoer. Therefore, the defender cannot argue that the plaintiff is a wrongdoer if his wrongdoing is a separate act from the harm he has suffered. Under this defense, it must be determined how the plaintiff's wrongdoing and the harm he experienced were related. He lacks a cause of action if his own deed is what led to the suffering he experienced. Next category we will understand is involuntarily incident. Accidents come in two categories. First, act of God, and second, accidental occurrence. A natural force acting in an unanticipated way that neither human skill nor foresight could fairly be expected to predict is referred to as an act of God. Friends, accidents are unavoidable and they cannot be prevented by taking any safety measures that a responsible person would be expected to take in that situation. Accident was unavoidable as a legal defense. Therefore, the defendant may enter a plea and demonstrate that the act was beyond what a reasonable person would do, invoking no culpability. Next is predictable mishap. This we will understand with the help of nitroglycerin case. In this instance, nitroglycerin was shipped by a common carrier while being packaged in a box. The carrier's employees opened the box on P's property. Since there had been some leakage in effort to stop it, the P's premises were hurt as a result of an explosion. P filed an injury claim. It was determined that the defendant had taken all necessary procedures and was not at fault. The defendant also had no knowledge of the contents of the box. The accident went above and beyond what a reasonable guy would expect. The defendant was declared not accountable. Next is the case of fighting cannons. In this instance, P and D's cannons were engaged in the combat. D was using a stick to beat them apart. P was the spectator. D accidentally struck P in the eye, seriously injuring him. D was found to be irresponsible because there was no negligence. In the case of Brown versus Kendall of 1850, the collision was unavoidable and could not be avoided. Next is the dog and the motor vehicle case. D had a calm and a submissive dog in his car, which was parked by the side of the road. P was crossing the street while on foot. The dog leaped, howled, and broke the window pane. P suffered a damage to his eye when a splinter got inside. It was held that D was not at fault because this accident was unavoidable. And this was held in the case of Warden versus Harcourt Rivington of 1932. Next category we will understand is an act of God, that is vis major. In this case, the damage is caused by the natural factors beyond the control of humans, without anybody's intervention and ability to foresee the act. In such a situation, friends, God or nature is cited as the main cause and there is no obligation. In the case of Nicholas versus Marsland of 1876, a river's natural stream had been blocked off. The court determined that D was not responsible for the destruction of 4 rural bridges caused by an exceptional downpour that caused the embankments to break and the water to escape. Nobody could have rationally anticipated such a rainstorm, which was an incredible act of nature. Act of God is a factual issue that needs to be proven. In the case of Greenock Corporation versus Caledonian Railways, the corporation altered the stream of the water's natural course to construct a pool. The stream overflowed as a result of unusual rains. Peace property was harmed by water entering in it. Although it was decided that rain was an act of God, the corporation was found accountable because the stream's deviation was caused by human activity. The justification of Nature's Act was disapproved by the court. Friends, act of God include lightning, earthquakes, cloud bursts, tempests, hurricanes, snowfall, frost and more. In Noble versus Harrison of 1926, a tree limb fell on a car, smashing it badly. Because it was a divine act or an act of God, the tree's owner was exempt from the liability. In another instance, the iron chains had been used to bind a tiger on the grounds of a circus. The chain was struck by lightning, the chain was consequently severed, and the tiger was freed. It entered the neighborhood village and murdered a resident. The circus owner was absolved of responsibility because this was an act of God or a divine act. In Ramalinga Nadar versus Narayana Reddiyar of 1971, the plaintiff had scheduled the conveyance of goods with the defendant. The looting of commodities by a mob was beyond the defendant's ability to stop. According to the ruling, no circumstance that is out of the defendant's control qualifies as an act of God. It was decided that an unruly mob's damaging action could not qualify as an act of God. According to the statement made, accidents may occur as a result of interaction of natural forces, human agencies or both. It may also be stated that an accident is inevitable in either of these cases. Next category we will see is accident. Accident refers to an unforeseen injury, and if it could not have been anticipated and preventive, despite the defendants exercising sufficient caution, it is the inevitable accident. Therefore, friends, it is a strong defense if defendant can demonstrate that neither he intended to harm the plaintiff nor was he unable to prevent the harm by using reasonable caution. In Stanley versus Powell of 1891, the plaintiff was hired to carry ammunition for a shooting party while they were pheasant shooting. A party member fired a shoot from a distance, but the bullet bounced into the plaintiff's eye after striking a tree. When the plaintiff filed a lawsuit, it was determined that given the circumstances of the unavoidable accident, the defendant was not liable. It should be highlighted here that when an accident is unpredictable and its effects are unavoidable, despite it taking reasonable safeguards, the defense of the inevitable accident is applicable. The Supreme Court explained in Highways Department of South Harcourt versus Vedantacharya of 1987 that the defense of inevitable accident cannot be pleaded in such a situation even if the occurrence is one like severe rain and flooding, if the same may be predicted and guarded against and the effects can be averted by reasonable precautions. Next category we will understand is the private defense. Friends, it is legal for everybody to defend oneself or one's property with a reasonable amount of force, and the aggressor will be held legally harmless for any resulting damages. There are 3 stipulations that must be met before this defense can be used. First, the use of force must be justified by an imminent danger to the victim's life or property. For example, A may use force against B if he has a reason to believe that B will attack him at some point in the future. However, retaliatory violence follow an attack is never justified. Second, only react with as much force as is required to stop the act. Third, the force used by the defendant must be proportional to the severity of the offense and necessary to protect against the threat. If A strikes B, it would not be reasonable for B to respond by cutting off A's hand with his sword. The defendant Holbrook, in the case of Bird versus Holbrook of 1823, was found guilty of using a spring gun strap to apprehend a garden thief. He did not issue a warning message. Petitioner Bird chased an escaped bird into the garden, triggering the trap and severely injuring his knee. Bird filed a lawsuit against the Holbrook, seeking compensation for his injuries. In spite of the fact that traps or man traps can serve as effective deterrents if notice is also posted, Holbrook was found liable for his actions. He intended to do the harm, not just to scare people away. In case of illegal or unethical conduct, the law provides a defense known as illegality. When properly employed, this defense prevents recovery for both immoral and illegal actions. The plaintiff's actions may have contributed to the accident involving an overloaded truck and a bridge. If the bridge were to collapse, the plaintiff's case would be successful. However, if the defendant was at fault, their wrongdoing would be the deciding cause, making them liable. Next, we will understand mistake. When someone willfully infringes on other person's right, it is generally not a defense to say that they had mistakenly believed that here was some justification for doing so, when in fact there was none. Trespass is when someone enters a person's property believing it to be their own, taking other person's umbrella believing it to be their own, and harming other person's reputation without any justification. In Consolidated Company versus Curtis in 1894, an auctioneer was asked to auction some goods by his customer who genuinely believed that goods belonged to the customer. The auctioneer did so and he paid the customer the proceeds of the sale. However, the goods actually belonged to someone else and the auctioneer was found to have committed the tort of conversion. There are several exceptions to this rule where the defendant may be able to escape the responsibility by demonstrating that he acted in an honest belief. Next, we have necessity. It's important to differentiate between necessity and the private defense, since the former involves the harm being done to a victim, while the latter involves the harm being done to the wrongdoer himself, the plaintiff. The harm done in the case of the necessity is deliberate, whereas the harm done in the case of an inevitable accident is accidental. In Kopp versus Sharp, the case of 1891, it was decided that the defendant was not able for trespass because his actions were justified by the need to protect the game from an actual and imminent danger. The defendant entered the plaintiff's property to extinguish the fire before it could spread the adjacent land where the defendant master had shooting rights. To put out a fire which the plaintiff's fireman was already working, the defendant in the Carter versus Thomas of 1891 entered the plaintiff's premises in good faith but was found guilty of trespassing if the interference was not reasonably necessary. We will understand the next heading, that is legislative authority. Damage resulting from an act that the legislature authorizes or directs to be done is not actionable even if it would otherwise be a tort. Friends, when an act is done under the authority of an act, that is the legislature, it is a complete defense and the injured party has no remedy except for claiming such compensation as may have been provided by the statute. Friends, suppose when a train is operating, for instance, it can cause incidental harm to nearby residents through the things like noise, vibration, smoke, it could spark emissions and so on. Given that the building and the operation of the railway are permitted by law, no action will lie for interference with the land or for the incidental harm except for the payment of such compensation as the act itself may have provided. But that does not mean the authorities can act arbitrarily. They still need to be reasonable. This is why there are regulations that must be followed when building new public transport infrastructure. Grass and hedge trimmings were carelessly left by a railway company employees near a railway line in Smith versus London and South Western Railway Company, the cases of 1870, which eventually caught fire when sparks from an engine landed on them. The railways company was found responsible because of their carelessness. The cottage of the plaintiff, located some 200 yards from the railway line, was destroyed in a fire that was carried there by a strong wind gust. Friends, now we reach to the conclusion. In conclusion, generic defenses are very important in tort law and can be used to get out of potential liabilities. Understanding torts is important, but having a broad understanding of defense is crucial. The majority of the matters that have recently been brought before the courts involve tort where the concept of generic defenses is particularly applicable. Similar to the options for redress for harmed parties, the defenses for alleged parties are a crucial component of any law. Many a times, the defendants are innocent and the victims of the events that result in culpability for their actions after all requirements under tort law have been satisfied. The general defenses in tort law play a significant role in this law and aid the defendant in avoiding any potential liability. A thorough grasp of such defenses is crucial for their proper use in certain instances. If every single perceived offense compels you to go on the defense, you will still have more field work to do. With the quote of Christine E. Zymanski, we come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you very much. Have a good day.